Hello. I want to talk a little bit about burdens today. What's a burden? Well, one definition is that it's a heavy load. Some heavy loads are taken on willingly. When I was pregnant with my first child at 39 years of age, it was a thrilling experience. I certainly didn't class it as a burden at the beginning. Because of my advanced age, I thought that this would be my one and only pregnancy, so I savoured every moment. I even enjoyed, rather than endured, the morning sickness and continual kicking. Oh, I loved that. And once I'd got over the stage where I just looked as though I was putting on weight, and you could see clearly that it was a pregnancy, I actually enjoyed looking at my swollen belly. But let me tell you, the closer I got to my delivery date, the more I looked forward to being relieved of this tumour that everyone was oohing and ahhing over. It had become a burden. I'd never had a baby before, and I began to panic, wondering how on earth this increasingly growing baby was going to get out. Now, that was the part I was really scared about, and how grateful I was to be relieved of that burden. Even though I still had a few extra pounds to get rid of, I felt so light once I was able to hold my baby in my arms rather than in my womb. When I picked him up to cuddle or breastfeed him, it was a delight to be able to look at his little face. But even that became a chore as the months went by because he got heavier and heavier. What a blessing when he decided to walk all by himself when he was 8 months old. Well, that child was so independent. My little Morris Minor was walking just like his dad at 12 months old, minus the beard and guitar, of course. And I felt so free now that I didn't have to carry him around all the time. It's great that some burdens have their own expiry date. Another definition for a burden is responsibility. And we all have responsibilities whether we like it or not. But it depends on how our attitude is towards our responsibilities, whether we regard them as a burden or not. I now had a responsibility to feed and clothe my children, to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, but I never regarded that as a burden. It was my privilege and delight. Family life was the thing that truly satisfied me and made me happy. None of my children were accidents or mistakes. They were all God's way of enriching my life. I did, however, find it difficult to submit to my husband when I was first married. I knew it was my responsibility as a godly wife and mother to set a good example for my children. There was no point trying to bring them up as godly children if I couldn't be a godly wife, as children learn far more by what we do than what we say. And even if I managed to submit outwardly, it was a struggle for a few years to submit inwardly. You see, I'd lived on my own and done things my way for many years before getting married at 37 years of age for the first time, so I had a lot of submitting to do. I reached a point where I felt I wasn't cut out for marriage. I had a very good husband, but I didn't want to take orders or be accountable for all my movements. I felt trapped. Marriage had become a burden. I remember sitting myself down one day and going through all the options available to me to solve this situation. I could carry on living like this and be miserable. I could just leave the house and find somewhere else to live, or I could leave and take the children with me. The problem was that none of these options seemed like good solutions. So I asked myself, well, what do you want? Well, I wanted a happy marriage. I wanted my children to have a great childhood and grow up in a happy environment where their mum and dad were together because they loved each other, not out of duty or for the sake of a good appearance. Well then, I asked myself, if that's what you want, how do you get it? My problem was I'd been a Christian too long, and it wasn't only that I was a Christian, but I'd been in ministry for years. I knew what the answer to that question was. I just had to love my husband. There was no point saying that I loved God, whom I couldn't see, if I couldn't love my husband, whom I could see. I just had to humble myself and learn to be submissive with the right attitude, and not because it was my duty. Once I got this into my thick skull and tried to put it into practice, I was amazed at the way Morris responded to me. He actually saw my efforts and it softened him up. The responsibility to be a good wife and mother now became a pleasure rather than a burden because we were working together in unity. And I wasn't putting up a fight anymore. And I ended up getting exactly what I wanted. Another definition of burden is that it's something that is a cause of worry, something which is grievous, wearisome, or oppressive. I carried this sort of burden for years. When I left home at the age of 16, I thought I'd leave all that behind, but in actual fact, I just carried it with me wherever I went. I was never free. I've come to realise that some burdens we carry, although thrust upon us initially, actually they become very precious to us. I grew up with real hatred in my heart for my parents. I knew it wasn't acceptable, as I was a Christian, but I held on to it. And because I justified my hatred, I nursed it, and I lived in denial that I had a problem by burying it deep inside my heart. If I'm honest, I didn't want to be free of my hatred, because it would have left a great big hole in my heart, which I feared that God would fill with love, and I didn't want that. I don't know what burden you're carrying. We all pass through loads of stuff on our journey through life, and I've found everyone has a story to tell. The experiences we go through are meant to mould and fashion us to become who God intends us to be. But if we hang on to our burdens, they'll end up destroying us by crippling and shrivelling up our spirits. And there's nothing worse than an ugly spirit. Some months ago, I had a vision of a lady who was wearing a baby carrier on the front of her body. Didn't have a baby in it, but it was full and bulging with a great heavy burden. This woman wore the carrier continuously. She'd get out of bed wearing it, shower with it on, get dressed and put it back on outside her clothing. She'd put her coat on to go out, and she'd wear the carrier outside her coat. When she boarded buses, she'd sit next to people and open her carrier to show off her precious burden to anyone who wanted to indulge her or show her a bit of sympathy. She'd go back home, take off her coat, and put the carrier back on, as she did her household chores. Then finally she went to bed. She'd get undressed and strap the carrier back on before getting into bed. There was no letting go of this carrier. It was a very precious burden to her. But then I saw her in church on Sunday morning. When she went to the communion rail, she knelt down, took off her carrier and set it down, whilst she took the bread and wine. She knelt there and sobbed and poured out her heart to the Lord for quite some time as she gave him her burden. But then, as she got up to go back to her seat, she picked up her loaded carrier and strapped it back onto herself again. I looked in amazement at her in my vision, wondering why she'd do such a thing. She'd laid it down, given it to the Lord, but then picked up her heavy burden again. Why? The Bible instructs and encourages us to hand all our burdens over to the Lord. In Psalm 37, it says 3 times, "Fret not yourself," stressing that we shouldn't be anxious or worried or troubled or agitated about anything. I've got some scriptures here that I'd like to just read to you. Just listen to the scriptures and let them sink in. Psalm 27 verse 14. These are all instructions. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he will strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Leave it with God to sort out. Psalm 42, verse 11. David's asking himself, why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you disquieted within me? Soul, hope in God, for yet I shall praise him, who is my health and my countenance and my God. Psalm 55 verse 22, cast all your burdens upon the Lord, and he shall sustain you. These are promises. Psalm 62 verse 8, trust in God at all times. He's telling you, trust in God at all times, you people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. And then it adds the word Selah on the end of that, which means think about that one. Psalm 146 verse 5, happy is he that hath the God of Jacob for his help, whose hope is in the Lord his God. Proverbs 3 verse 5, this is an instruction. Learn this verse, it's good for you. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. Jeremiah 17 verse 7, blessed is the man that trusts in the Lord, whose hope the Lord is. Philippians 4 in the New Testament now. Philippians 4 verse 6. Be careful for nothing. That means don't be worried, don't be anxious about anything. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. Talk to God about it. 1 Peter 5 verse 7. Cast all your care upon him, for he cares for you. Don't you think it's about time you did yourself a favour and not only lay your burdens down before the Lord, but left them there? It's necessary to let things go for the simple reason that they're too heavy. In Matthew 11 verse 28, Jesus said, come unto me, all you that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So don't rob Jesus of a blessing. He wants to give you peace. God bless you.